their patio. And most importantly, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on unceded, ancestral, traditional lands of the Thana Atham people who have stewarded and cared for these lands for many generations. Tonight's proceeds will be going towards FUGA, Familias Unidas Ganados Accesibilidad, an awesome organization from the south and west sides that fights for representation and builds community. Speaking of community, we are having a breakfast by bike ride on Thursday morning. So if y'all want to make some pancakes, do some coffee with us, that's the time. One important announcement is we are also in the area of trains. So if a big train comes by, we're going to take a little pause, and a good chance for a stretch break, bathroom break, and then we'll continue the presentation after that. With no further delay, I'd like to welcome our speakers tonight, Sarah, who has worked incredibly hard on building some of our favorite routes and hosts our favorite cycling event, the Ruta Del Jefe, and our MC, Lael Wilcox, whose amazing feats of self-determination have inspired multitudes. We're really excited to see more representation and leadership in the cycling community and in the industry. And with that, I'm going to step to the side. Thank you.
Woo!
Hello, I'm Lael Wilcox. I live here locally in Tucson. It's lovely to see a lot of familiar faces, friends. Sarah's folks are here, her partner Adam is here, and I am just here to support the talk. First of all, we'd like to thank Campfire Cycling and Borderlands Brewery for hosting us, and everybody for coming. And Sarah has put so much work into this talk, and she has so many great stories to tell, and I'm just honored to be here. So first, we'd like to get to know the audience a little bit. And we were talking about this earlier. For me, the best parts of these events are to hear people laughing, cheering, gasping, involved in what we have to say. So first I'll ask, who is visiting? Who is not from Tucson and is here for Sarah's talk? Okay, so we have about 2 visitors. Who are snowbirds who are here down for the winter? Yay, about 5 snowbirds. Then that means I better hear a lot of noise for the next one. Who locally lives in Tucson? I think I technically count as a snowbird, but I do live here too. So a little backstory about Sarah. She worked in bike shops for 15 years, owned and operated her own shop for 5. She's ridden across the U.S., both east to west and north to south. She has been a professional cyclist for 8 years. She co-founded Radical Adventure Riders, a movement towards gender inclusivity and racial equity in cycling in the outdoors. She researched and developed the Sky Islands Odyssey Route project here in southern Arizona. She's hosted, over 12 years, she's hosted gravel rides and events around the country, including the Ruta Del Jefe in southern Arizona. And she's written for a lot of different publications, including Lonely Planet and The Radivis and Bikepacking.com and all over the place. But the thing that I most admire about Sarah is that she's able to both see the big picture of building a route and creating an event, and then to go into it with an immense amount of work ethic and attention to details to make it all come to life. And you will see this in every route that she has made and every event that she's put together. The people that come really care about it. So who here has ridden any of the Sky Islands Odyssey? Woo-hoo! Yeah. And this Friday, we'll all go out for a grand depart for that as well. Over 3 days, we'll ride the full route or sections of the route. And the cool thing about this is that it's not competitive, but it's people taking on challenge and going out there to just do something hard together and investigate a place and care about the land. So without further ado, I invite Sarah Swallow onto the stage to talk tonight. So the way this talk will work is that I'll ask questions for a while. Sarah will talk for about an hour, and then we'll open it up to the audience to ask questions to Sarah as well.
Thank you, Lael, and thank you, Ru, for running our presentation tonight, and thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your time tonight.
Great. How did you first get involved with bikes?
Yeah, so I first started working with bikes before I actually rode bikes myself. I got a job at the Loveland Bike and Skate Rental in Loveland, Ohio when I was 12 years old. And I actually worked there for 8 years. And there I, equipped novice cyclists to cruiser bicycles to ride like 4 miles down a bike trail, get some ice cream, look at the river, and adjusted their seat heights, fitted their helmets, cleaned their bikes, and just informed them on this little rail trail that we had running through town, which is like 70 miles and a paved bike path. But yeah, like there, that was a really formidable experience for me. I feel like I learned my work ethic at the Loveland Bike and Skate Rental. My boss there was an ex-military guy, so he was pretty like militant in the tasks that he would give me. But yeah, so I attribute that, and then I also have experienced hosting my first event at the bike rental called the Pedal Paddle Porch Party, which was a event where people would rent cruiser bikes, ride their bikes for 4 miles down the bike trail, canoe down the river, and then come back for a party on the porch at the bike rental. So it was it was really fun, and but I didn't actually get into bikes like for myself until I graduated from high school, and I'd always done traditional sports growing up in high school and in middle school, and when I graduated, I was like, okay, well, I'm not playing field hockey anymore, so what's next? And my parents had just recently started road cycling, and my dad let me borrow my mom's bike one day. I guess my mom let me borrow her bike as well. So he took me out on a ride, and coming from a family of runners, I thought it was like the most amazing feeling to ride like a road bike, like how low impact it was, how fast you could go, and I got kind of hooked on that element of it,
So you were into the feeling of riding,
yeah.
But when did that change to you were looking at maps and making your own routes?
Yeah. So that also was instigated by my parents. Like as I was a kid, like a youth, I definitely, I struggled as a kid. I didn't like do well in school. I got in a lot of trouble, and I just never really like found something that I really clicked with me. And so when I found, that I liked the road bike at least, I got kind of hooked. I was like, okay, this is something I really want to investigate. And I think my parents saw that in me, like for the first time in my life. And my dad had gifted me an old Ohio road atlas map, and that just spurred the inspiration to like explore places in Ohio that I had never knew that were there. Like my experience was the suburbs or the city, and so it was cool to be able to get out and explore the forests and the state forests that we had in Ohio, and then in southern Indiana and northern Kentucky, and I just started making my own routes rather than I had gone on plenty of routes where I was like, what the hell are we doing? This is miserable. And so, I just was like, I can do this myself. So I started to do that.
That's really cool. Tell us a bit about your experience working in bike shops and having your own bike shop?
Yeah, so the bike shops, just with my experience at the bike rental, I had I always just felt comfortable working with bikes. I liked the people that always walked into the shops, and just always felt really inspired by that work and just small business. And yeah, so I worked a lot of jobs. I was a lifeguard, I was a waitress, I worked retail, I did everything. But I always just came back to bike shops. And so I got a job at my local bike shop. And yeah, was a sales clerk there for a couple years, and then ended up managing that shop. It was called Cycle Sport and Try, and then Wheelie Fun. So there was like two shops that I kind of went in between, and yeah, and eventually the owner of those shops closed the shop. So my partner at the time, we ended up opening our shop, Swallow Bicycle Works, in 2010, in about a third of the space of cycle sport. So we opened our shop in 2010, and kind of specialized in mechanical service, customer service, outfitting, and then just spurred on to this is our shop. We made all like the fixings and stuff, and at the same time that we opened our shop, I really that's kind of during the time where I learned that I was obsessed with gravel riding. I was cyclocross racer for 5 years, and to learn that there was like a combination of cyclocross and road cycling that I could use my cyclocross bike on was just like perfect. And so this just spurred a whole series of community rides that I would host on routes that I kind of built all throughout Ohio and northern Kentucky and southern Indiana. And these are some of the flyers that we had that my sister, Mary Lytle, who's still doing my route design illustrations today. So she was doing it all the way back then too. Yeah.
I mean, this looks really cool. And at that time, 2013, so you were riding like what size tires?
I think like 33s or 35s or something. I always go bigger than what was allowed.
That was like the rugged off-road size
back
then for adventure. And now what size tires do you ride, Sarah?
Depends on the ride, but if it's a really like nice gravel ride, 47s are the minimum tire. That's my road bike now. And then my standard adventure rides, I'm riding more something like this with a 2.3 to a 2.5 inch tire.
Yeah, this is Sarah's new bike up front too, just built up today, basically.
Today by Sean.
Sean. Yeah, so it's looking really good. This is kind of the all-road tire at this point. Okay, so you had the bike shop, things are going incredibly, you're hosting events, everything's successful, and then what happens?
Well, so I was advertising a lot of, the way I marketed our bike shop was through Instagram. So it was actually, my first introduction to Instagram was then. And so I would share photos and write stories on like a blog, and I don't know, somehow Specialized Bicycles found out about me, and they ended up offering me a sponsorship in 2015. And so that was kind of a huge thing, because I was like, okay, well, I have this, stipend of money and, this sponsorship. I want to do something with it. And, I had opened the bike shop. I had gotten married and opened the bike shop within like 6 months of each other. And it was when I was like 22 years old, something really young. So, I kind of skipped a little piece of my youth, like I didn't get out to explore, but there was this piece of me that just really wanted to do a cross-country ride. I just always wanted to do that. And so I started doing, but I never wanted to do it on pavement, just never have been interested in like touring on paved roads. So I did some research, and I ended up finding this dual sport motorcycle route across the country that goes east to west, and it's called the TAT, short for Trans America Trail, but it's kind of confusing because Adventure Cyclist also has a Trans America Trail. But as you can see, it's a slightly different route, and it follows primarily dirt roads across the country. And so yeah, what we did was we decided to close the shop. We were trying to move out of our space anyway, so we closed the shop, and we're like, well, we'll go on the strip and we'll figure out what to do afterwards. And closed our shop, kind of sold a lot of our possessions, moved out of our house, and embarked on this nearly 3-month journey across the country. So the total route is 5,000 miles and over 300,000 feet of climbing, and this was actually my 5th bike tour. First bike tour over 6 days. Yeah, and it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Yeah, like there were times, you know, down in Mississippi, for instance, that was when I almost quit. I had made it that far, and you know, we had a dual. It was actually a mountain biker who was also a dual sport motorcycle rider come meet us on the route and camp with us one night. And he spent the whole night kind of telling us, you know, why. Well, I should mention that we were the first cyclists to attempt to even ride this entire route. So this guy thought, you know, we were just two nobodies doing this really big, important thing, and you know, just expressed himself that way. And the next day, we hit the worst mud of the entire trip, and yeah, I got really down on myself. So I was like, okay, I'm done. You know, what was I even thinking about being out here? Like, who am I to do this? And you know, that was just a really hard moment that I had to get through, where, you know, I was just like, I just remember calling family, talking to my partner Tom at the time, and you know, we just decided that we were going to stay the course, and we were going to finish. In that moment, we were going to finish every last mile of this ride. And yeah, I've never felt like I ever had to finish every single mile of a route ever again after completing this.
That's the best.
Yeah, so this is Colorado. This is climbing Imogene Pass, which is absolutely ridiculous on a gravel bike. Would not recommend, but you know, it was incredible. Yeah.
What was your, looking back at it, what was your favorite part of riding that?
I mean, the landscapes and scenery that we got to experience all across the country were just so profound. And for me, like, it was my first introduction to like this world, you know, beyond, you know, my little bubble in Ohio. Like so many different ways of living and you know, making a life for yourself, and just the in and out of riding day after day, like falling into a rhythm, just really suited me, and I really fell in love with the routine, and you know, I ended that trip just wanting to keep going. And so that was you know, there was a big transition after this trip where my husband at the time and I were conflicted. You know, I wanted to keep pursuing traveling by bicycle, and you know, he wanted something different. He wanted to like settle down with the bike shop, you know, have kids, and that I just realized after this trip that I couldn't do that. And so yeah, I just made the decision to kind of follow a dream, take a big risk. I mean, it was a huge risk to even go on this trip, and it was an even bigger risk to commit, you know, to a life that I was going to pursue it even more. So yeah, that was kind of the start of my commitment to like pursuing making a career as a professional cyclist, my job, and instead of owning a bike shop.
Yeah, so then what did you do next?
Yeah, so I mean, the next few years, I just kept riding my bike like all over the world, and got to just see so many different places, had so many humbling experiences, and just you know, again, like just you feel a lot smaller when you see the rest of the world. You get out of your bubble, and wonder and awe, like just the beauty that I experienced just from traveling on my bicycle. And yeah, so I just did that for I'm still doing it, but I did it heavily for 3 or 4 years. um, yeah, and like this is New Zealand, um, and yeah, I've traveled, in South America, Central America. I think I've been on every continent except for Antarctica. This is Peru. Mm.
How would you choose the places you're going to travel to, and what were you looking for?
Yeah, that's a good question, because like I'm pretty picky cyclist in terms of like what I like and environments that suit me. I'm a very like allergic person, so like bugs. I don't like humidity or anything like that. So I tend to like gravitate towards like drier places. And as I mean, New Zealand, there's just midges everywhere, but it's a you just kind of have to balance the differences. But yeah, generally dry, sunny, that kind of stuff. So not doing the Iditarod anytime soon.
It's pretty dry. It's very cold.
Until it starts melting.
Well, it looks like you ended up in a lot of really beautiful places. And I guess I just, want to hear how that worked, I guess, for that time you're traveling and you're a professional cyclist. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of confusing, and because like the career itself, as you know, like has been changing with social media and it becoming more of a thing for companies, because where it started was writing blog posts and articles for magazines, and where it eventually went was collecting content for brands to publish on their social media accounts and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I would get I have annual contracts with brands, and yeah, so I would go out and do adventures. But again, like the shortcoming of traveling all the time is just that my experience is like working with people and bikes and like sharing my experience. So like while these things are very influential to me and inspiring to me and like fuel me with a lot of life, they also are kind of isolating and in a way like purposeless sometimes. So yeah, it's just about finding a balance, like, and how much I can travel versus how much I want to be like home and based. And again, like I realized over this time, from leaving my community in Ohio, was that when you're traveling all the time, you realize how important community is to just your mental health and just like the stability of everything. And so I realized that, yeah, I need some balance. I can't just like live on my bike all the time, 365 days a year, as much as I probably want to in my mind, but I just know that that's not actually sustainable. So now I'm based in Tucson, 6 months, and Durango, Colorado for 6 months. And between all that, I still go on lots of adventures throughout the year, but I have home base. And yeah, both these places feel very much like home for me.
Well, tell us a bit about that transition, though, because you are one of the only people I know who's changed from kind of full-time travel on the bike, living on the bike, to bringing other people into it. So a bit about, I don't know what you want to go into first, Radical Adventure Riders, or if you want to talk about Skyland's Odyssey, but from changing from this is my own personal trip to this is something I want to share with people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sharing my, like, getting people outside into like new experiences with like the gravel riding in Ohio, this was always something I like to do. I just love taking people into environments that they're not used to being in and like all tackling something challenging together. And so yeah, like the sky, when I first came to Southern Arizona, I immediately realized like, hey, you know, I want a bike tour in this place. And so I started putting together a bike packing route for myself. And then, yeah, like coincident, like at the same time, actually, let's start with Radical Adventure Riders, just because that was such a profound experience with, yeah, so Radical Adventure Riders is an organization that I co-founded with 6 other individuals in 2017, actually really influenced by Lael's hosting of the Baja Divide in 2017, in the winter of 2017. On that bike tour, it was a group bike tour, 100 people showed up, and half of the field were women. And so, you know, for the next 2 months, I spent kind of going in and out of different groups where the ratio of riders was 50-50 women to men, and that was my first experience riding in that kind of ratio in my entire life, and that was really profound. I was like, wow, it's totally different. You know, there's just different qualities in different groups. And yeah, I think I was also riding it with some of the other folks who ended up founding Radical Adventure Riders with me at the time. And we just realized, we finished that trip and we were like, you know, we want to ride more with, you know, women, trans, femme, queer folk. And it's, you know, we want to create space. Like, we were really surprised that there, you know, wasn't too many spaces where we could do that. So Radical Adventure Riders kind of started with a bikepacking ride series. So we hosted, you know, I think 5 or 6 bikepacking rides with, you know, from 10 to 20 people each ride all throughout the country. And then that was leading up to a summit where we had like 150 people come. The first one was in Whitefish, Montana in 2018, I think. And yeah, it was just an educational, we were there to connect and learn from one another. And yeah, so we had lots of like seminars and clinics and rides, and so we hosted 2 summits and you know, a bunch of bikepacking ride series, and then I eventually hosted a gravel camp down here in Southern Arizona in 2020, I guess is when it was. But at the same time, you know, I was also working on the Sky Islands Odyssey bikepacking routes. So those were developed over the course of like 7 different trips down here between 2017 and 2018. And while I was researching those routes, you know, I kind of realized, you know, first, you know, obviously like everybody who comes here gets sucked into just how beautiful Southern Arizona is, particularly around, you know, Sonoyta and Patagonia. And that was my experience. I was just like, oh, this is amazing, you know, especially for bike packing with how dry it is and sunny it is and can be in the winter, but also just how much the scenery changes down there. But as I was researching those routes, I just realized, oh, you know, like there's a lot of ugliness to this part of the world as well. And I kind of just had a fork in the road where I had to decide, like, hey, do I just want to like do this ride, you know, for myself and share it with my friends or whatever, or do I want to like do something a bit more meaningful and, you know, use my history degree and you know, write something for a guide that kind of shows like the whole picture of this place, not just like, you know, the pretty cool, you know, sunshine kind of things. You know, let's just talk about everything and bring people down here more consciously. And so that's kind of where the Sky Islands Odyssey bikepacking route started, and then they kind of evolved over time. So with the Sky Islands Odyssey routes, for those of you who don't know them, there's 3 routes. There's a 125-mile east loop, a 175-mile west loop, and then a 235-mile full loop. And I've just recently kind of overhauled these routes as well. So there's also gravel bike-friendly routes available now as well. But largely they're mountain bike kind of territory, adventure rides, so they can be chunky, a little bit of everything. I definitely wanted to include this one just to let you know what you could experience on some of them. But yeah, so once we established the Sky Islands Odyssey bikepacking routes, the natural progression was to host a single day event on one of the routes, the East Loop, called Ruta Del Jefe. And I know most of you are all from Tucson, know that El Jefe is the name of the jaguar that used to, whose habitat was in the Santa Rita Mountains between 2010 and 2015, until he migrated down to Sonora, which we just learned of this past summer, which is very exciting. He's the oldest jaguar that we know of currently. But yeah, that's what inspired Ruta Del Jefe. So with Ruta Del Jefe, it's a multi-day, event where we're hosting presenters from different local nonprofit organizations, from conservation, humanitarian aid, and indigenous groups to come educate the riders the night before they go out and ride. And then they go and ride the course, have a bit more context for the place that they're riding. And we celebrate with lots of live music and great food and bird walks and habitat tours and all that great stuff. Fun stuff.
I mean, I just want to highlight, so I started riding in this area in, I guess, late 2017, and then at that time I was riding down in the Borderlands, would see 0 cyclists. And now there are probably, 1,000 minimum riding the route every year. Every single day you will see people with bags on their bikes rolling through, checking out the area, camping, and it's dramatically changed the community down there in a positive way.
Yeah, I think I do think that cycling with a bit more education and connection to the landscape that you're riding through not only is more fulfilling for us as riders, but it's also good for the community. It's good for conservation and just any of these issues. Like if we can become more engaged with these places, I believe we have a huge potential to have a huge impact on a lot of these issues, and that's kind of where I would like to see. And I think that doing this and like being more conscious riding where we're riding is especially important, because as Lael pointed out, there's thousands of cyclists now going down to Patagonia to ride, and there's so I've heard this idea of this place being a gravel Disneyland, and that concerns me. Like I don't want it to be a gravel Disneyland. I want of course it's got amazing gravel roads, but there's just so much more to this place, and I think that we can all participate in a really powerful way if we can engage in it a little bit more. Woo!
Well, would you like to talk about the groups you work with down there now, or do you want to save that for later, or how you've been involved with the local community?
Yeah, so we have a zine here after the talk that we're asking for donations for the local organizations, but partners that have participated in Ruta Del Jefe in the past have been No More Deaths, Dawn Autumn, Individual Dawn, and let's see, we've got Save the Scenic Santa Ritas, who educate us on, the latest on the Rosemont Mine, and the Appleton Whittle Research Ranch, which I should say has been was a real key to everything happening with the Sky Islands Odyssey, bikepacking routes, and as well as Ruta Del Jefe, because Ruta Del Jefe was routed there. And I think it's an important story to tell, just because the routes don't currently go through there, because the former director that I was working with has since stepped down. But it's an important story of like the potential for relationships between like conservation and cycling, and just the way that I found this place was just finishing the scouting of the Sky Islands Odyssey, and just finishing this last piece of the route that was going to connect the San Rafael Valley to the Las Cianegas National Conservation Area. And it was, on a map it looked like it would go through some more grasslands, and it just looked like a beautiful segment. So I wanted to get out on the ground to check it out. And so as I did, I was riding this, double track, which was the last slide that you saw there. And yeah, so you come up to this ridgeline, which anyone who's been out there knows, and it's just one of the most beautiful spots I think I've ever been in my life. And it was almost too good to be true. As I was riding down that road, I was like, okay, this is amazing. This is amazing, And but yeah, eventually came to a gate, a locked gate with a private property sign on it. But there was a number on the bottom of the sign, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this number a call and just see what's up. And so I did, and Christina Francois picked up the phone, and she had just recently taken over as the director at the Appleton Whittle Research Ranch 2 months before, and was looking for ways to increase their outreach to new groups. And so she promptly came up to the fence and met me, and we exchanged phone numbers and emails, and spent the next year kind of communicating with each other, building trust, and figuring out a way of like opening the Appleton Whittle Research Ranch for the first time in its existence for 54 years to the public through permits. And so we did that, and that's when the Sky Islands Odyssey bikepacking routes were officially launched in 2018, was when we had solidified a plan to allow for permits. And so the natural progression was to host Ruta Del Jefe there the following year, and we ended up hosting Ruta Del Jefe there for 3 years. So Christina stepped down this past summer, and the Appleton Whittle Research Ranch has been in transition, and so that while this has been happening, they're not allowing cyclists right now. Their mission has always been to use this 8,000-acre preserve for research, so they can inform policy to how to better care for grasslands, which are endangered ecosystems in southern Arizona due to overgrazing in the past. And that's the primary focus. So the introduction of and the potential for introduction of invasive species is a huge concern for them, and until they figure that out and feel comfortable allowing cyclists back in, they're kind of taking a pause. But that's not to say that this work isn't continuing to go. It was a great experience. It was a great learning experience. It developed this template and this format for working with these private conservation organizations. And through Ruta Del Jefe in 2022, which is this past year, Cuenca Los Ojos, which is an organization outside of Agua Prieta, Sonora, Mexico, attended the event. Their board of directors, their executive director, and some of their researchers presented at the event. And after that event, they invited me to come down to do what I did at Appleton Little Research Ranch by like establishing bike packing routes and day ride routes to promote some ecotourism so that they can diversify their income to sustain their work and also share their mission with more people, different populations. So that's kind of where we're headed in the next 3 years is the project. And Ruta Del Jefe will be moving there in 2024.
Let's celebrate! I mean, that's just incredibly cool that it's the Jaguar migrated, the event is migrating. You know, something that kind of became closed off and was not functioning anymore is changing to a new place that's inviting you with open arms, and it's across the borders, happening in Mexico, which is really cool because this is part of the issues of the place, is that we're in the borderlands and people think different things about where we should be riding bikes, and so we can ride somewhere new and we wouldn't be going there otherwise. So hats off to you, Sarah, for making this happen. I'm beyond excited.
Yeah. It's going to be exciting. You know, it's going to be a lot of work. Where a lot of these roads, as you can tell, some of them are, you know, haven't been ridden by bicycles at all. So, you know, my scouting trip in last October was very challenging, and it's definitely going to be prime adventure territory here. So everybody, you know, bring your mountain bikes. But yeah, so this is a really special place. It's in the foothills of the Sierra Madre Occidental, kind of where the Sky Islands meets the Sierra Madre, and it's right on the edge of the Chihuahuan and Sonoran Desert. And it is the location where at least 2 jaguars have been documented and currently are using as their habitat. There's water. So Cuenca Las Ojos means watershed of the springs, and so their focus has been over the past 40 years to control erosion so that the water can seep into the ground, and support year-round water in their creeks and in their watersheds. So because they have been able to establish this, you know, jaguars have been coming back, and ocelots and black bears and beavers and Mexican wolves, and so it's a very wild place, and it's a very exciting place where it'll just serve as a great, you know, discussion point to talk about borders and how land doesn't know borders, and how the newly constructed border wall in this region is blocking creatures like jaguars or any creatures over 6 inches wide from getting through that border wall to migrate into the United States, where their natural habitat has been for forever, you know, all the way up to the Grand Canyon. So yeah, it's just an important topic to talk about, and I'm just really excited to learn from the experts down there.
Well, on that note, that makes me think also about your work to continue a route on the Great Divide route south of the border as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience on Tour Divide, and then you know, extending the route?
Right. Yeah. So, so part of the Cuenca Las Ojos project, you know, my goal for them is to bring cyclists to that landscape and to create opportunities for people to ride. And so Cuenca Las Ojos has 2 different areas. One is in Sonora and one is in Chihuahua, just south of Antelope Wells, New Mexico, which is where the current endpoint is of the Great Divide mountain bike route. And this region that Cuenca Las Ojos has in Chihuahua hosts not only prairie dogs, but like a population of 300 bison, the original bison that used to habitat this landscape of Chihuahua for forever. So it's a very beautiful landscape. I don't think I have any pictures included here in the slides, but it's just, you know, 30 miles south of the Great Divide mountain bike route where it ends. So rather than ending that route at a border crossing with a border patrol sign, I would love to see that route either end at Cuenca Ojos or continue on through Mexico, through mainland Mexico. So that is one of the projects I'll be pursuing over the next couple of years. Be supporting this whole journey. But yeah, as Lael said, I did the Tour Divide in 2021. It was like a kind of a post-COVID decision for me. Like I just needed to get out and ride my bike for a really long time. Yeah, I decided to fundraise for the Karen Project through that to raise money to get more young women and girls on bicycles and in the outdoors. And so I fundraised throughout my ride. I think I ended up doing like $8,000 for Arizona Trail Association Gear Girls. Yeah, just I think I ended up like second place that year. But yeah, so I mean, I didn't go out to race it. I set expectations really low for myself. I was like, I'm going to give myself 30 days to do this ride. And if I'm not done in 30 days, I'm going to get picked up because I don't want to spend like all summer out there. I have other things to do. And so I set expectations low, and to my surprise, I'd never done the entirety of the route. I had always done segments of it. So, I was pretty surprised with how easy it felt for me, compared to all the other things I signed myself up for. So I just had a really sustainable pace, and I slept, for 7 to 8 hours every night, and ended up passing a lot of people that were not sleeping, and just had a really, really fun time out there. Like I really enjoyed it, and would highly recommend that route to everybody. Like it's such a beautiful way of like seeing the country, and just the trail magic and all the culture around the route and the community of people that do the route throughout the year is just really fun. So yeah, would recommend.
You've said a couple times, so with the TAT, with the Tour Divide, that really long rides, like these long, hard rides, are really good for you.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by that? Like good mentally, good physically? Because I feel like in everything you do, including this talk tonight, you are incredibly methodical. Like you think of more things than I would ever think of times 100. So because I go on long rides and I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm just totally out there and whatever happens.
Yeah.
What goes on for you? Why is it good for you to be out there?
I mean, it's good for my mental health, like it's when I'm doing these long rides, it's like you get to like practice all the things that you're trying to practice in your day-to-day life, like your busy life. Like meditation and just like being in your body and just being really conscious with your surroundings, being really present. And that's really hard to do, when you're around like cars and jobs and people and, like all the life stuff. And, but with, on these long bike rides, it actually is very easy for me to do. And that's where I really just kind of feel a very like heightened sense of self and just presence with myself. And that's why I say it's good for me. And it's also a good way of like processing. I processed a 10-year breakup, a marriage after 10 years, and so I went on a really long bike tour after that. And you don't have to have these like profound experiences to go for a bike ride, and I'm not recommending you do because it's not for everybody. But for me, that's what happens. Like I get very present, and I am able to just really get in touch with myself in a way that sometimes is just a lot more difficult when I'm not riding a bicycle.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like you just kind of go through everything on your own, but then at a certain point you're like, okay, I've like thought of everything I could possibly think of. And then you're like, well, I want to be with the people I love,
Yeah.
you know, and I want to share this with other people. And if I'm just, you know, my only mission is to move forward, I'm not sharing anything.
Right.
So I'd love to hear some of your stories from riding with Adam.
Yeah.
And what's happened out there.
Yeah. Well, this is a favorite story, so I brought it tonight. So this picture's taken here in the Bolivian salt flats. This whole trip started as a disaster. We showed up in La Paz, Bolivia, 2 days before Evo Morales was forced out of presidency. So there was, just total chaos, and we were in the middle of it in La Paz for 5 days. So we got stuck in the middle of essentially a queue, and ended up having to kind of sneak out of there and fly to Arequipa, Peru, to start a whole different trip. And so we ended up doing, eventually we did the Ruta de las Vicuñas, which is through a series of national parks in Chile, and would highly recommend this route. I mean, it's by Cass Gilbert. I love Cass Gilbert's routes. I think he makes the best bikepacking routes. So if I'm doing anyone's bikepacking routes, I'm usually doing his routes. But yeah, so the routes ended with the Bolivian salt flats. And the first salt flat was just extremely wet. And so there's just water on top of a salty playa. And what was happening for our ride there, we had crossed the border. And actually, I would just say, 2 days before getting to the salt flats, we met a couple cyclists on the road who had just come the opposite direction. And we were like, well, so how's the salt flats? And they're like, oh, it's great, easy, flat, no problems. The one's a little wet. But funny story, we met a guy who had totally gotten lost from his group. And we're like, oh, that's so weird. Like, how could you get lost from your group in the Bolivian salt flats? Like, you can see everywhere. There's nothing obscuring your view. So yeah, we had that experience, continued on, crossed the border from Chile into Bolivia again. And it was an extremely rough ride, kind of developed some chafing and a little like saddle sore situation. And so by the time we got to that really wet salt flat, my whole backside was just drenched in wet salt. And so I was just like sitting in wet salt. And so imagine sitting in wet salt with like an abrasion on your behind, like how uncomfortable that would be. And it was. And so yeah, my method there was to, I rode pantsless through the rest of that salt flat. And I'm not going to show my bare ass in front of you guys tonight, but it is on Instagram, and if you really did want to see it, you can see it there. But yeah, so you can see all the salt there. It was messy and wet and not recommended. But yeah, so the next stage of that, we camped together that night and made our way to the next Salar de Uyuni, which is the famous one. That's, for riding, it's a 110-mile distance across this flat salt playa. And so I was riding, my partner Adam was with me, and we were riding together, but we ride different speeds and paces sometimes. So like, I'll let him go off the front and I'll do my own thing. And contrary to what it looks really smooth, but the salt flats are actually very bumpy. There's like little crests of salt that divide it like a honeycomb pattern in a way. And so it's really hard to find like a smooth line. It's just really repetitively bumpy. And so, we started just flowing into our own rhythm and routine. And before I know it, like, I'm seeing Adam. He's a small, like, speck in the distance. And I'm like, okay. And so we get to this place, or it was like this island where we're supposed to be able to resupply our water. And I can't find Adam anywhere there. And I'm like, okay, this is not good because, you know, he has our tent, he has our money, and he has our food. And so
What did you have?
I also, well, no, I don't. I had chips. And I had a sleeping bag and a pad. I don't know. You know, I always just carry a bunch of random stuff. You know, but yeah. So I couldn't find them. Lost them. You know what happens in the Bolivia salt flats is that, you know, those specks that you see, like what I was actually seeing was, you know, so far in the distance that it was a size of it was a car that I was actually seeing. So anytime I thought I was seeing a little cyclist, it was actually a car just really far off in the distance. So it's just a very weird visual obscurity. So we got separated for over 36 hours. And it was like, this night was probably 60-mile-an-hour winds on the salt flats. And, you know, I sheltered behind my bike, but Adam, on the other hand, you know, we were probably within 1.5 miles of each other the whole time, but couldn't find each other. And Adam went to camp that night as well on the salt flats, and as he's unpacking his sleep gear, his sleeping bag blows away, you know, and there's nothing to stop it, you know, there's just the salt, like as far as it will go. And so yeah, so he kept riding, and you know, we eventually saw some other cyclists that was like, yeah, he's there, you know, but we reconnected. This was the last day of a month-long tour, and we lost each other, but reconnected at the end, so it all worked out.
That's incredible. That's an absolute nightmare. But you know what? That's what it shows you, that it actually does work out. That's about the worst I've heard.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it wasn't
there
too
you
bad.
go. And look at this, like 5 years later, you're still together and
We're
still doing
together.
it.
Yep, still getting lost from each other, you know. It's great, yeah. Yeah, riding with a partner is really fun, you know, like it's so great to be able to ride with a significant other. But you know, it's also, as you imagine, very challenging as well. So there's peaks and valleys, and you know, all sorts of experiences to have.
Well, do you want to share any other riding stories before we open it up to questions, or you want to share any takeaways?
Well, so I mean, I guess I'll just share that, like, you know, there's some other things going on. Like, I'll be hosting this thing called the 1 Hour Day Challenge in May. And this is something I hosted last year publicly, but I've been doing for myself for a couple years now. And the idea is just to ride your bike or just move your body outside for at least 1 hour per day for 30 days. And this year we're hosting it in May during Mental Health Awareness Month, just to promote like healthy work-life balance, just, you know, getting in your body, out of your head, like whatever you use the bike for, like we want to know why you're using it, and how it helps you with maintaining your mental health, because I know that that's how it is for me. Like before this talk today, I had to go on a bike ride because, like, you know, just had to get rid of the nerves. So I just encourage you, like, if you want to participate in that, you know, we'll have lots of ways for you to get involved and to join that fun. But I've done it for the last couple of years and found it really, really fun. But yeah, what else?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I'd also like to shine a light on how, you know, Sarah's doing these things because they're great things to do and they feel good, but she's also including every single other person that's around her to just be part of it if they want to. There's never any pressure, but there's always an invitation, and that's very unusual. So I just want to thank you for always doing that. So many times I've been personally inspired to just go do something because Sarah said, hey, let's do it.
Yeah.
You know, from the start, and I feel like that works for everyone. It's like, just invite people to come with you. even if you think they're not going to want to do it, that doesn't matter. It'll make them think about it. They'll think, maybe I could, because there's so much built into us, and I feel like this is, especially us as women, like this Radical Adventure Riders, that was so groundbreaking and cool, because every ride I went on was with just a bunch of dudes, and they all felt like, oh, because we are all riding, then it's a race, no matter what. And I feel like this changed the culture of like, it's not a race. Yeah. And things, it also doesn't have to be easy. It can be hard and together. Yeah. And that's different. So I just want to say how cool that is. Yeah. That changed a lot, and that also changed, it doesn't have to be all women, it can be like a wonderful group of people that want to come together, challenge themselves, do something hard, but also celebrate that we're all there doing it. Yeah. So I feel like Sarah Swallow has been somebody that has fundamentally changed the culture of bike packing and made it so much better for everyone else. So let's give a big hand to her. Woo! Woo! I mean it. And now I think I have to run around and field questions from all of you. So don't ask something from the far back yet. Anybody have a question? Let me come to you.
Thanks, Lael. Yeah, I also just want to give a shout out to Lael real quick for coming in last minute. We were on a ride this weekend, a mountain bike ride, and I was like, dude, Lael, I gotta give this talk. Like, tell me what to do. And she's like, well, I'll moderate it for you. And I was like, God, thank God, because I just really, writing is my thing, and speaking in front of a bunch of people is pretty terrifying for me. So I appreciate you guys bearing with me.
Okay, we have a question here.
First, thank you so much for coming tonight, Sarah, and thank you, Lael, for interviewing you. It was really inspiring. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the Mexico weekend adventure that you're going to have. Is it going to be like a 3-day? Is it going to be like you can do a bunch of short rides, or you do one big ride? Do you know what it's going to look like? And also, when you talk about the Great Divide Trail going down through Mexico, are you thinking Chihuahua, Sonora, Sinaloa? Is that what you're looking at? Because I have some experience down in Bavispe, Mexico, and there's some really great, dirt roads and Jeep tracks through there. So just wondering what you were thinking about that.
Yeah. Great question. I would love to speak to you about your ideas, because we are still developing our route for the continuation of the Great Divide. But yeah, it will be Chihuahua to Sinaloa, ultimately ending in Durango, Mexico. So we'll be taking it through the Copper Canyon. This first segment that we're planning to scout is happening in April, so we'll ride from Antelope Wells, New Mexico to Creel in the Copper Canyon. Kind of ride through there and then make our way back, and then come back in the fall and continue that project in the fall. So we'll just be doing it piecemeal. But yeah, in terms of what Ruta Del Jefe will look like in 2024, it's looking likely that it'll be Thursday through Sunday, with opportunities to volunteer with some local organizations in the days before Thursday. But yeah, Thursday we'd have you all down to get established, get camp set up, and then do a little shakedown ride. And then we're hoping to have like a little bit of a movie night where we'd show American Scar and some other films that were filmed in the area. And then Friday is the big educational day. So we start the day with bird walks and habitat tours, and kind of transition into a live music and food, and kind of getting ready for the presentation. So particularly at Cuenca de los Ojos, where there's going to be a huge focus on creating a binational event. So we'll have organizations represented from Mexico and the U.S. to make a truly Borderlands experience. And so talks will be potentially in Spanish and English. And so we'll have talks and on Friday, as we've always had, and then the ride will be on Saturday. And so the ride options for Saturday will range from, I think we've got like 12 miles to 40 miles is the long distance, but in that 40-mile distance, I think you're climbing 5,000 feet of climbing. So it's big climbing miles and mountain bike territory. So it's technical. You're climbing from deep canyons up to grassy ridge lines, and just really spectacular terrain, just stunning, rugged. And then we'll wrap up the weekend on Sunday with hopefully the goal is to have an advocacy training seminar. So we'll be taking you know, everything that you've experienced that whole week and laying out a plan for how you can take what you've experienced into your life. So whether that's organizing in your community or volunteering for an organization or organizing your own event, you know, like however, whatever way makes sense for you to get involved, but we'll try to create a roadmap for you so that we're kind of closing that loop, because the ultimate goal for Ruta Del Jefe is to create advocates for these places. And so we do have a huge fundraiser as part of Ruta Del Jefe, and that will always happen, but we want to take this beyond donating and fundraising. We want to take it into action.
Hey, thank you so much for tonight. It's amazing to hear from both of you, but my question is about a recent post of yours and your specialized sponsorship or your ambassadorship, and I guess like how important has that space been for you in your career, and how do you see that space looking in the future? Because like you said, social media is changing, and the way I guess companies are using social media to promote their brands. And yeah, I'm just really interested in that, because for people who maybe don't have a following like you or Lael, and yeah, how do you move into that space with those things shifting? So that's my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm gonna answer this question, and if you have like a follow-up question, if I don't touch on that, then let me know. But I think I got what you're saying. So what she's referring to is this past December, like, you know, a few days before Christmas, I learned that my multi-year contract with Specialized was abruptly terminated. And so I was with Specialized for 8 years, and they were the main source of my income. And yeah, so that was, you know, hugely disappointing and frustrating. And so I've been spending the last like couple months, you know, negotiating new contracts with other brands. But it's been kind of a good time, because it's allowed me to really work with brands that really care about the work that I'm doing and are really invested in it. So that's, you know, community work over competition, which is what it comes down to in the cycling industry. Unfortunately, sometimes it's like they're either, you know, focused on that competition, or they're more focused on like diversity and community. And yeah, so it's been given me the opportunity to work with some new brands, which my new bike brand here is Campfire Cycles, which I'm really just excited to start this relationship with, and to share my story and share my experiences with. And yeah, so, but I think like continuing on, like I do rely on these partnerships to support the life I'm currently living, but there's also a bigger picture of kind of making, you know, Sky Islands Odyssey and Ruta Del Jefe and the Sky Islands Adventure Rides all kind of under the umbrella of a nonprofit. So that's kind of the long-term vision, and to get more people involved to make all of these adventure rides more accessible to more folks. So yeah, that's, did I answer? I should also say that part of what, because of what happened with Specialized, it led me to kind of organize this other sub-community group called the Ambassador Collective, which I'll be launching in the next month or so. And that's for community professionals that work with cycling brands. So, 1099 kind of contracts where we're sponsored cyclists or ambassadors or content creators who can all communicate with each other on rates and contracts and just like information to further the field. Because what I realized when that specialized contract was terminated was, for one, I had signed a 2-year contract, like they, and it was ended a year early. So, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. So, it's just important that we all communicate. And I didn't know who I could talk to in that situation. Like, we're also isolated from each other. We're not, together. We don't have, I have friends, and like Lael and I talk, and Sarah Sturm and I talk a lot, and I'm really grateful for those relationships. But as a collective for the profession, if we want to continue to do this work and further the field, then we need to all work together and communicate.
Yeah, and I'd like to add a little bit to that too, is that Sarah has a really unique set of skills of route design, organization, community building. This is often not, it's pretty much a thankless job. Most people are doing this like in their spare time, just throwing something out there, and then you get what you get. You like take a week to ride a route, and then you find out, oh, it just pushes through a swamp, and you're like, oh, that's a bummer. Sarah actually takes, like, one of the few people I know that takes care, making sure that it's really, really good, and putting the resources out there, sharing like where you can camp, what's happening in this place, what's legal, what's accepted, to try to like make it something sustainable. Bikepacking has been in the past 10 years this explosion where I used to know everybody that had a bag on their bike, be like, oh yeah, that's so and so, and now I see like people everywhere around the world doing this all the time. So it's changed a lot, but the routes are like the like bones of it. And then there are like a few great route builders and a lot of really bad ones. And then I wish this was something that people just got paid to do, because some people are really good at it, but they don't. And then the cycling world in general just pays racers. And even if you're a racer, that's still a very unstable condition where you're like year to year. But I mean, bottom line is we get to do what we love. If we get to do it for one more year, then awesome. But there is no stability in this at all.
Yeah, that's right. It is a very difficult field to enter into, especially as it's always changing too. Like there's ebbs and flows. Like it's pretty rare to be able to be sponsored, be paid to go on adventures and do community work instead of doing competition. Like most sponsored riders are sponsored for competition. So I'm in just a very unique situation, and it's, I want to see more people and more brands valuing that kind of work, and I think that they do, but again, it's all dependent on the economy and the market, and when things start getting cut, we're the first ones to go. So
totally. All right, next questions. Right here.
So kind of to expand on what Lael was just saying, and just in terms of your process of like how to route find, obviously you're a professional, and people who make them now are all professionals, so like I get that you don't want to encourage everybody to go out and just like, oh yeah, find a route. But how has your process of like scouting evolved from looking at atlases to being on foot to the maps and apps and internet, and how's that like evolved throughout your time, just like planning out all these routes? And then also like what qualities you had mentioned earlier, that like one of the qualities that you have now is that you don't ever need to finish a ride. Like, what other qualities do you think that you would throw out there for people who are like amateur route finders, and just to kind of adhere to as they're putting routes together?
for sure, that's a great question. And I love that question because, like, I think I encourage everyone. I mean, if you're interested in route making and routing your own routes, I think I strongly encourage that because it's really fun, and you get to make routes that suit your riding style and your preferences. And yeah, it's just a really fun activity. But it does require that you are fully prepared for the consequences of your decisions, and you're the one responsible for that. And you stay adaptable in that whole process. Like, you know, like you got to be prepared for, like, if you hit a fence that is fully private property, like we're gonna shoot upon seeing you kind of thing. Like, you got to adapt. You got to be prepared to, you know, get around that in some way. And yeah, and I think there's a difference between route developing for the public and route developing for yourself. Like, you can generally get into like a lot of like fun adventures maybe that you wouldn't recommend to other people by yourself or with a small group of friends. But for the public, there's a lot more work involved. And so, like, over my years and processes, I only choose to develop routes for the public when, you know, when I've got the time and capacity to do that, because that is a ton of work. And, you know, the Sky Islands Odyssey bikepacking routes, I've been, you know, maintaining those routes since 2017, 2018. And it's just a lot of work to maintain, because land use and ownership changes, and yeah, the monsoons can totally wash away a whole road, you know, like, so there's just constantly change and maintenance to be done. So yeah, I think that's most of it, but I may have missed part of your question.
I think the part that I was curious about too is like your process. You know, so like where do you start? Where do you get your inspiration from? Kind of like what fuels it, and also like where do you go when you have that fuel? Like, do you just start looking online? Do you start looking at maps, or kind of how does that evolve from in the beginning to now?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think in the past I used to use like a lot more paper maps than I do now. Now I use the web, and I do a combination of like hybrid satellite mode and just hyper zoomed in to make sure these roads exist. But that also comes with like some risks as well. And I also use like Onyx to see where private property is. And yeah, I kind of like follow what's interesting. You know, you can read lines on a map and see, you know, if they're going through canyons. I'm particularly interested in beautiful landscapes. So like I research the landscape, and I see if there's other people riding those areas, and kind of look at what they're doing. And yeah, so I just try to research as much as possible, and the internet has so much stuff. Like, also dual sport motorcycle routes are huge, you know, like especially through like Mexico. We're going to be leaning heavily on dual sport motorcycle routes through mainland Mexico. So you know, there's just so much out there already. But in the case of like Cuenca Las Ojos, this is a place that, like I said, no bicycles have been riding there. You know, there's some roads, but in large part they're, you know, scarcely driven. And so that was tough, you know, like the first ride that we did on our scouting mission at Cuenca Las Ojos was like a 2-mile hike-a-bike through grass that was like as tall as my shoulders, and, you know, it was just totally ridiculous. And we're like, okay, well, you know, we got to the summit, like that was ridiculous. We'd never send anyone this way, and this was a terrible way of starting the trip. So we're gonna go back to where we started and do something easier. So yeah, just, you know, like, you know, when you're doing your own route, like, it's always an adventure, which is fun. But again, like, just reading the group, reading your own, you know, enjoyment of it. Like, don't suffer, you know, like, don't suffer too much. Like, a little bit of suffering's fine, but like, you know, just follow and be adaptable, be willing to change plans. And I think those are all really good skills to learn and develop and to have in your back pocket if you're making routes.
Hi. So I just started bike packing like in the last year, and I don't know if this is like more of a female thing, but it seems really scary, like being out there alone, and maybe that's just a universal thing. But do you have any experience with that? Like, even an example, like I was scared in this situation, and this is how I overcame it, or maybe like, does fear crop up in these, out in the wilderness, alone? Or maybe that's something you don't deal with.
No, yeah, I've definitely dealt with that, and is this still working? I don't think it is. Hello? Does this work? Okay. Definitely have dealt with that, and you know, I have a lot of experience riding by myself, but I also ride with other people too. I like riding with other people, but you know, when I first started bike packing, particularly on that tat, one of my biggest fears was what was going to happen, like with other people. I was scared about the people that I would encounter, and that was the biggest takeaway from my ride on the tat, was that like I had so much more faith in humanity after that, just because like, you know, you're so like vulnerable and exposed, and I should say that like looking the way I do, you know, I'm white and I'm a woman, you know, I carry a lot of privilege as I travel through the world, so that gives me, you know, certain confidence that other people may not necessarily have. So I think that's a big point to address, but like, yeah, just realizing that you're vulnerable and exposed, and people see that and they want to help you, and I think that was the biggest takeaway, was just that everybody was just so kind, even people that I was like, you know, we probably would not agree or, you know, be friends in real life, but like, you're taking care of me right now, and you're like, you know, humanity, like one-on-one, you know, we care, you know, and so that was the biggest takeaway. But at the same time, like, you know, I've gone on a lot of adventures like in the wilderness by myself, and you know, the times that I get kind of scared is when I kind of, you know, either watch a scary movie at night, like in my bivvy, or you know, like when I'm like really wanting to see a jaguar in the Chiricahuas, and I'm like trying to manifest that until it's like dark and I'm hearing rustling in the grass near me, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to see a jaguar anymore, like, so like, you know, my big thing, like to kind of combat a little like fear at night, is to wear earplugs, you know, and you know, that way I just don't hear, you know, them coming, you know. But it gives me a lot of peace, and it allows me to sleep, so that I'm not just like waking up every twig that's snapping or whatever. But yeah, that's my strategy.
All right, who's next? Yeah. Okay, make it movie.
I'm just curious if you have any fun close calls that you'd like to share around bike packing in this Southwest area.
Close calls, like what kind of close calls?
Could be water scarcity, food scarcity, drivers, a raptor in the air. I don't know. You decide. if there is such a thing, great.
In the
Otherwise,
Southwest?
I'm just curious.
Yeah, you know, like down, yeah. I mean, I'll even put the earplugs in the wind, you know, like it gets windy out there, you know, you gotta just silence that and, you know, get some peace. But, yeah, you know, like, I think the Southwest, in particular, you know, the weather is what catches people off guard out here. So I've been, you know, in kind of, you know, like everybody here, you know, everybody comes down to Tucson, Arizona, thinking that it's going to be like Florida, and it's not. And so, you know, that's definitely how I first started coming down here as well. It's like, oh, it's like Florida, you know, it's going to be warm, but it'll be like snowing. And so, yeah, I mean, I I can't think of any particular close counters. You know, the only thing that just comes to mind is, you know, just the reality of what can happen in southern Arizona is just, you know, meeting refugees in like desperate situations, and that's just a really tough thing to experience down here, but it's a reality, and it's definitely something that everybody should just keep in mind, and just educate themselves on like what's actually happening down here and how much people are suffering, because you know you're out here equipped with water and food, and some of these folks have been lost for 3 days with no water or food or any idea of where they're going, and so that's just a really hard reality to face when you're on a bike tour. So it's just you know, something to keep in mind.
Okay, who else?
So I would love to hear your vision. Like if somebody gave you $1 million to do whatever you wanted to do with either bike packing or your rider conservation partnerships, like what would you do?
Great question. I think about that all the time. Well, you know, this whole thing would be a nonprofit, and again, we would just have so many more people involved in, you know, route development and maintenance. It would be multiple ride leaders to make it more accessible for all different types of groups and skill levels. It would be fundraising power to donate and organize volunteers for partnering nonprofits. It would be hosting Ruta Del Jefe in multiple different locations. You know, this is the dream, you know, but it requires lots of money and time and energy. But yeah, that's kind of what I would do.
Okay, who else has a question?
I just wanted to kind of go into like mechanical. So given your skill set as like a tech and having all this bike building and maintenance experience, I'm sure that you maintenance your bike better than most people do, but especially when you get out onto the trail, like what are some of your most common like mechanicals, and like what are some things that you keep in your kit to help with like things that might come up?
Yeah. Well, great question, because I am not a mechanic and I do not maintain my own bicycles. I have mechanics and friends that do that for me, and my method is to keep my bicycles as maintained and as possible before I go on a trip. So I actually rarely get mechanicals. And yeah, like the things that can happen is like you break a chain link, you know, or you get a flat and you have to plug it with, you know, I run tubeless, so you're plugging it. But yeah, a lot of, you know, from my experience, a lot of that mechanical stuff can be avoided with just proper preloaded maintenance. And I, you know, Sean T. Randolph over here is my mechanic, and yeah, he saves my bacon all the time.
Oh yeah, so then there was another one closer up here.
So I wanted to ask what goes into calibrating the difficulty of a route on bikepacking.com, because I've had multiple arguments with friends about this is not a 4.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the overhaul, was because, you know, one of the things is the rating on bikepacking.com has evolved over the years, and so has the Sky Islands Odyssey, particularly the East Loop. The East Loop has gradually gotten more difficult over the years, and is now currently the most difficult route of all the Sky Islands Odyssey routes. So if you're curious about like which ones to ride, technically the full loop, gravel loop, is the easiest one, followed by the West Loop, and then followed by the East Loop. The East Loop includes a lot more technical terrain. So part of that overhaul is to reflect that difficulty. And yeah, unfortunately, just with how we, like bikepacking.com is the one updating the route, so I can provide them with that information, but it can take weeks and months before it gets updated onto the website. So that, again, is something that's a shortcoming of this whole situation, which is what I would, I would love to do, is to have my own, website where we can keep the routes maintained and up to date with all that stuff. So we're not relying on like a middleman and a whole nother source to keep it updated. But yeah, I've been sandbagging all the people doing the East Loop for the past like 3 years, and I'm sorry. Yeah, it had a lot more dirt roads in the past, and it's I kind of like, I like a healthy balance of dirt roads and technical terrain, and like the dirt roads just, these days can get even more busy with cars and stuff and getting dusted by cars, and so I do tend to gravitate taking it into like remote, like 4x4 terrain, just get a bit more engaging and a little bit more remote, and usually there's better camping in those areas too, so that's kind of where I'm going. But I've done the two, we've got an East Loop version now with that's more gravel bike friendly. I think all of the routes are better on a mountain bike, but if you are just riding a gravel bike, then I've created two, an East Loop that's a gravel bike friendly version, and then a full loop that's a gravel bike friendly version. So hope to get more people, doing it regardless of their bikes. We got a question from the lady in the hat over there. It's my mom.
Thank you, Sarah. As someone that doesn't ride a lot of gravel, but a lot of you will get older. And what if we're wanting to start like at a minimalistic thing? Like what if we wanted to go out and do 10, 15 miles a day? And is that conceivable? I mean,
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you just have to be able to carry enough food and water to get you to your destination. You could even stay in a hotel or a cabin every night if it works out with the route. But there are routes out there that you can do that. It's just finding the right thing for you, and it's choose your own adventure, make it whatever you want it to be. There's no right, wrong way of doing it. I highly encourage, like, if staying in a place every night where you don't have to carry your tent and your sleeping bag is something that feels good for you, then you should do that, because you're going to have an awesome experience doing that. I mean, I do that still. Like, I love doing credit card touring sometimes, like so yeah, just do it whatever makes sense for you, like just to get you out there. Like 10 miles a day, like I go 10 miles a day sometimes on bike tours, like that's just what feels right. So just follow that. There's no, you have to ride 70 miles per day. Like that's where you start getting into territory where you're like comparing yourself to a bikepacking.com rating, where you're like, oh, well, it says I'm supposed to do this in like 4 days, but I could see myself doing this in 10 days. Like that's just, following your flow. Like for me, like my average preferred distance on a bike tour, and this is all dependent on like terrain and elevation gain, but generally it's like 30 to 35 miles. Like that's a good daily rate if I'm just out there touring. I like to have a slow morning, enjoy camp, eat good food, go swimming, like take breaks, do all the fun things. So even doing all those things and riding 35 miles can be a really big day.
That I totally agree with that too, because you think about that, like if you weren't doing those things, what else would you be doing? Just sitting at home watching TV? So it's true. Go out there and ride 10, 15 miles, and you'll start and end in different points. You'll find something new along the way, and there's no pressure. I mean, the thing is, you're like, okay,
I was wondering what's happening with the radical adventure riders, and if you know of any groups of women getting women together to go bikepacking in town. That would be awesome.
Yeah, that's a good question. So Radical Adventure Riders right now is running a fundraiser to start 20 chapters all throughout the country. So they already have like, I think 6 or 7. But they're trying to open more, and I know that there's a lot of energy and willingness to create one in Tucson. But again, it just takes funding. So if anyone feels encouraged to donate to the Radical Adventure Riders fundraiser right now, that would really help make that happen. But yeah, there's group community rides happening like all throughout the week here in Tucson. That's something that I absolutely love about Tucson. So if you want to connect with me afterwards, I can kind of give you some references to those rides. Yeah.
How can we donate?
So yeah, if you look up like Radical Adventure Riders on Instagram or on they have a website. They're currently running a Kickstarter or GoFundMe, so you'll find the link somewhere there. Yeah.
Okay, anything else? Or we're gonna wrap it up. All right, where can we find you, Sarah?
Yeah, so a good source of like just getting connected to all the things that we talked about tonight would just be through Instagram. I also have a little notebook at this table over here where I'm collecting emails. So if you want to be notified about like the Ruta Del Jefe or Sky Islands adventure rides, which just wrapped up for the season, just give me your email and you'll get the correspondence for that. We also, Liz over here and Sean, we all collaborated on a Sky Islands Odyssey zine that we just completed as of like today. And so we have a zine here that we're just asking for a $5 donation to one of the organizations mentioned in the zine in exchange for that zine. So it's awesome. Liz has put in a ton of work putting this together and adding all these awesome illustrations. There's a crossword, there's a bingo, like really cool pamphlet there. So yeah, check that out. And then I also have like some stickers and cards over at this table as well. So grab some of that. And then let's see. Yeah, we're doing this ride this weekend. So if anyone gets a wild hair and wants to join, there's going to be about 60 cyclists leaving from Patagonia on Friday morning. And it's kind of a choose your own adventure, choose your route. The goal is to finish in 3 days. So there's half of the group is setting out to do the East Loop and half of the group is doing the full loop. And the goal is to start together and finish together. So we'll all be kind of gathering in Patagonia. So even if you want to come down to Patagonia on Sunday evening and join us for like a beer and some food, then we'd love to see you. And then yeah, come join me in the 1 hour a day challenge. It's a fun thing to do. It'll be happening in May. So right as it starts getting hot, right as everyone here in Tucson is going to start not wanting to ride your bike, you're going to, get encouraged to do it despite that. And yeah, join me for that. And then just stay tuned for the rest of this stuff. And yeah, thanks for being here and giving me your time tonight. I know how precious it is. So yeah, and thanks to Lael for stepping in and Rue for running the presentation tonight. So I really appreciate them doing that. So thank you.
Thank you so much for taking your time and making such an amazing presentation, and Lael asking such awesome questions. That was rad. Do you want to have people come to the table?
No, you can do the
raffle.
I'm just going to be here, so.
All right. Sarah's just going to be over there at the table, just chilling out. You want to say hi? We're going to hop onto the raffle here. Big old box.
Must be for the twins.
All right, so the first prize